All right, folks. So I'm beginning a new series here where we're going to be looking at building some humanoid base meshes. And we're going to start with a sort of low poly retro style. And then we'll move on to a sort of mid poly style. And then we'll see about doing maybe a more dense one, although I'm kind of leaning away from that direction just because it's a lot of work and effort and time, really a time investment. So I think in the vein of trying to produce meshes that can be used for sort of indie development purposes, we'll stick with some lower poly, mid poly stuff. And we'll look at generating the meshes. We'll talk about UV unwrapping them. We'll talk about texturing and putting that all together and then getting some rigging done and maybe doing like some basic animations. So let's start off. We're in our first video. You can see here I've got my UE5 mannequin reference here. Generally speaking, when you're trying to create a base mesh, you should probably be working with some kind of reference material. And so this is my reference material here. This will give me the general proportions of the human body, and we can go from there. Obviously, if you've got 2D artwork, you can use the images to planes add-on inside of Blender and just sort of insert them in the scene. So the first thing I'm going to do is making sure that my 3D cursor is at the world origin. You can reset it with Shift C. I'm going to hit Shift A, and I'm going to add in a cube. I'm going to enter into edit mode, and this pie menu that I'm using here is from the Machine Tools add-on. So just be aware of that. Whereas you might just need to switch it over here or just hit the tab key to go into edit mode. Okay, so moving into edit mode, I'm going to move this up, using the G key and just kind of scale this down. I'm also going to turn on X-ray mode with Alt-Z. You can toggle that with this button up here. And I'm just going to start to roughly scale the proportions to the size of the mannequin behind it. I'm going to add a loop cut in here, and I'm also going to delete the left side of the model. And this will be a little more intermediate. I'm going to assume that you have a general understanding of how to model things in Blender and use the interface and such. I kind of want to move away from beginner-friendly tutorials because I find that there is a lot of beginner content regarding Blender out there, and there's not as much intermediate content. So I want to get a little more specific here. So now I'm just going to massage the shape of these vertices to sort of match my reference. I'm just going to extrude this up. Move this like this. And I'm going to put a loop cut here. And then eventually we're going to mirror this over. I'm also going to slide this loop cut over. And I apologize if I do sound a little bit different today. I've got a bit of head congestion, which will hopefully go away soon. But otherwise, I'm okay. So we're going to put this right in the middle, and we're going to keep this pretty low poly. I'm going to add another loop cut just right down the center there, and let's get rid of these two faces in here. We don't really need those. And now let's start to match from the front, or I mean from the side, actually. Let's move this and drag these in. And I'm just using a series of hotkeys as usual. We'll add in another loop here and another loop here, just so that we can get a little more resolution to try to block in the shapes of the body here. Then this is going to be characters undercarriage, and we're just going to shift things, maybe rotate a little bit, try to fit to the proportions of the mannequin that we have here. We can also drop this down a little bit, and that's looking pretty good. I'm ready to mirror. So again, I'm using add-ons like Machine Tools. I've also got Hard Ops, so I can hit Alt-X and mirror this. If you don't have that, just go over to your modifier stack and look for mirror, and you can just mirror it on the X-axis. You may also want to turn on merging and clipping. It's up to you, but that may help you. So I'm just going to use the Hard Ops mirror and work like this. Okay. So now that we have that going, we need to sort of round the shape out because it's still looking rather boxy or cubish. So let's slide some of these edges in. Let's do the same on this side, slide some of those edges in. And we might also take these edges and kind of push them in just a little bit. Want to watch out for our contour here being lost. So we're going to take this edge and just kind of like scale it a little bit. We can do the same here, just a tiny bit. Move this up. have that area there. Maybe move this down a little bit. We can actually leave this here because the nice thing about this sort of shape appearing is you can see the mannequin underneath. We have sort of this contouring of the rib cage that's going on here. So having this shape bending like this is not so bad. Same with here in the pelvis. We've got that same shape coming in here. So having these sort of not completely parallel like this is not a problem, actually. Some people may be tempted to flatten this out like this, and that's okay too if that's the look you're going for, but there's nothing wrong with this either way. So we're going to go this way. We can move this in. You can see that the Unreal Engine mannequin always has this extreme curvature in the back. So if you like that, you can follow it closely or, bring it back a little bit. Let's give a little space for the buttocks there, and we can move this vert down a little bit. And we need to, so since we're doing this low poly, I'm actually going to create most of these pieces as separate parts, and then we will eventually join them together when we get into the mid poly section. So currently, as our torso goes, and let's name this torso, we've got that piece there. I'll save real quickly. And that's looking okay. And again, if you've got a reference, work with the reference. This is basically just the base of the character. If your character has clothes or things like that, you can always model specifically to the clothes and not necessarily following along with the contour underneath it, because chances are you're going to remove those parts of the base mesh underneath the clothes to reduce the amount of geometry processing your engine needs to do. And, so just make sure you're thinking this way. What do I actually need in the character so that way I can make it more optimal for my engine or whatever it is you're applying this to, your game or your, render, whatever, to actually be more optimal. So in this case, we're just going to follow along with the contour of the base, and then later on, if we need to add clothes, we can do that. But if you're working from a reference, follow the reference and only include what you need to use. That way, you don't get bogged down with too much stuff. Now, it's very tempting for me to go in here and inset this and start to create a leg. But since we're doing low poly, like I said, maybe I'll take these 4 quads and I'll just duplicate them off. We'll leave them in place and hit P, separate by selection, and then we can call this leg. And then I'm going to delete the mirror modifier because it's got this issue of clipping in the center here. And I can scale this down so it's not directly on the axis there. And then I can re-add that mirror modifier. And then we can begin to shape the leg. So here I can extrude this out. And be careful not getting too close to the center there, because these will merge together because we have merging and clipping on. So just be aware of that. And I'm just going to take this and start to shape it a little bit. We need to make some minor adjustments here. And the good thing about doing it this way is that if we do want to merge these later, we have the same number of vertices on the connection to the leg as well as the actual leg itself. And like I showed before, we can do an inset later on, or we can add a little more geometry to both when we get to the mid poly level. It really depends on how we want to manage this. We may need to, looking at this, we need to change the back end there just a little bit, keeping this nice and low poly. All right, let's continue. And here, what we could do is we could do a similar thing. So we can leave the leg like this. We could also add in a little bit of geometry and kind of shape out the outer thigh like that. Maybe move this in a little bit, and we've sort of formed a knee part. So if you're going for like a separated low poly PlayStation 1 sort of style, maybe move this out a little bit, or maybe just this vert here will move out. Then you can do it like this, and you'll have separated pieces, which later you can overlap and then rig. So if you're going for that retro vibe, this is probably how you'd want to do it. And then we'll take this lower leg piece here underneath, and we'll duplicate it down and maybe flatten it a little bit. Again, we'll work with this. Yeah, that should be fine. So let's separate this. And we'll just call this lower leg. There we go. And let's start to build this out. So we need the little connector for the knee. So we're going to assume that that's the knee here. And actually, let's make sure I grabbed all these polygons. We're going to extrude up. And then we're going to grab these. And we're going to extrude down. Just like that. I'm also going to select everything and hit Shift-N to recalculate my normals. You can see there that there was some shading error. And that's because when I made that extrude, it was flipped inside out. So we should probably do that for all the rest of our meshes, just in case, although these look pretty normal. And there we go. So now what I can do is I can add in another loop cut here. I can move this out, move these out, and then scale these down. If you want to get really detailed, you can do this where you give it a little more resolution, although we don't really need that for this. And then just move this down. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to poke this vert out just like that, and then bring this one up just so there's a little more overlap between these parts. And then, in fact, maybe slide some of these down. Let's see, making a mess. Hang on, let me undo that. There we go. Let's grab all these and slide this up here like that. And then this here. So we may need to shift this a little bit over just so that way it connects a little bit nicer. And then we need to shape the back of the leg here. Let's scale this in the Y. I'm going to move this back like that. And then this is going to, here, maybe scale that just a little bit lower. So now you can see how we're sort of following the general shape of the mannequin behind. And then we can maybe scale this a little bit just to soften it up just a tad. And there we go. We're starting to have our character. And then maybe we'll bring this down a little bit to form the front basis of the knee. There we go. So there we go. We're starting to have our character, and we're again going to do the arms later on. And then the last thing we should probably do is the feet. So let's grab this bottom piece again, and we're going to Shift deduplicate, hit P to separate, and then we're going to name this foot. Then we can scale this down. And then so the way I typically like to do feet is I will extrude this down, and then I'll look at the front two faces here, and we'll extrude that forward and just kind of move this down like that. So this is an easy way. And then this might need to be a little bit larger so it looks like the ankle is attaching there. We also probably want to flip. Let's see if these normals need flipping. Nope, we're good. These normals do though. I can tell just by looking at them. There we go. And so now we can add maybe a loop cut, and we'll flatten that out. Kind of bring it down because you can see here when we flatten that, it's creating bad geometry. So we'll bring that down to fix it. And then we can just kind of move this back, and let's get this on the grid. There we go. Maybe scale it in on the Y just a little bit. And then if we really want more, we can, shape that just a little bit better. And then in the front, this is going to require a little bit of creativity or a little bit of working with the reference. So we need to move this over here. So it's like this, and then this can come in the middle. And it's a little bit squished. So we want to make this look more like an actual foot and less like whatever this thing is. So let's just open that up a little bit. And again, this is where reference can come in handy. Let's grab this one and just kind of move it like that. And then we can shift this over. There we go. And then the back of the foot is mostly okay, although we probably need to open this here like that. And if we want to, we could probably take some of these verts, make sure I don't have that one selected, and kind of move them down just a little bit to give it a little more roundness. Maybe take these 3 verts and kind of push them out, again, giving a little more roundness to the foot shape. Same here, these 2, we can probably push them out a little bit, maybe tuck these in a little bit, like that, and then slide these over. And then we'll take this middle vert on top and we'll just push this up. Push that up a little bit too, so that it's about even. Then these, we could probably slide down a little bit. There we go. It's starting to look a little more like a foot or a shoe. And then let's take these and just kind of push them out a little. And then here we can slide these back just creating that ankle shape. And with this one, push that forward a little bit, push that one forward. And then also on this, you could probably push this vert forward a little bit to round it out. Maybe slide this in a little bit and then back a little bit. So you're just massaging all of your verts into shape so that everything's not so cuboid or like 90-degree angles all the time. Although the front of the shin is maybe something you want to keep a little more flat. And then if you hit Alt-Q, you can actually switch between edit mode and meshes. So that way it's a little bit easier. We'll move this a little bit over, maybe scale it up just a little bit. And maybe even some tricks that I like to employ. Let's move an edge loop down here, and we're going to delete that edge loop later. We're going to select all these bottom verts, and I'm just going to right click and say smooth vertices, and that kind of smooths that out. And then in edge mode, we can grab this loop by holding Alt and then just Control X and dissolve it. So there, it's a little bit softer. We are getting some of this poking out at the top here, so maybe we need to scale this down and move it over again. You know, we could maybe delete that edge loop. We don't really need that. And you can see here how we're starting to form the basis of this very low poly character. All right, that's looking okay. Maybe we'll bring some of these verts back just a little bit, round off the tip of the toe. Maybe a little more on this one, so it just looks a little more like a foot. Looking okay. And maybe bring these three back just a tad more. That's looking fine. Let's save that. Okay. And then we need to work on our arms. So here again, we're going to take this part, duplicate it off. Let's make it a little more round actually. So I'm going to use the Loop Tools add-on, which comes with Blender by default, to turn this into a circle, really more of a hexagon. And I'm just going to extrude it out. And now there's a couple ways you could choose to do this. We could extrude it out and just make, you know, this, and then create an edge loop and grab these edges and bring them up into a shoulder shape. We could do it that way. Or we could extrude it out like this and grab these bottom parts and do like this. So it's completely up to you. I think this is a little bit better and more anatomically similar to how the human arm is actually going to work. And I'm going to take this bottom vert here. I might even move it up so that these are in line. And I'm just going to put this in line with the deltoid right about there. And then this up top. And again, we'll rotate it a little bit. Let me just double check. Yep. With this one, I'm going to shift it down, and then we're going to put this somewhere around here. And then this we can move up. So again, it's not perfectly in line with the mannequin here because this has more geometry, but this should mostly work okay. And then if we want more overlap, I can also take these two verts, and I'll show you. We can actually take this part of the mesh, since it's still connected, we haven't actually separated it, and hit L to select all the link things and hit Shift H to hide the rest of the mesh. And we can take these two faces and just extrude them inwards, maybe flatten them out, maybe also scale them down, just so that there's a little overlap in that socket, that if we're moving the arm up and down, you know, we're not going to be seeing a disconnection in the mesh. And then to show that center mesh, we're going to hit Alt H and it will reveal the mesh. And then I'm going to select this part here and hit L and then hit P. And then we can call this arm. Or we could call it shoulder or whatever. And then let's go into the side view, go into X-ray mode, and just kind of shift this over to put it in line with that. Go. And then we've created this here. Let's actually create the elbow portion. And again, maybe we'll use the loop tools to turn this into a circle. And we want to take and push some of these vertices back so it rounds out the shape of the arm just a little bit. So that's looking all right. And then we can take this and we can duplicate it, hit P, separate by selection. And then let's select, there we go. Select the lower arm. Let's call this lower underscore arm. Actually, I'm going to lowercase this arm just to be consistent, like I have with everything else. Torso, same here. Torso. All right, save that. And then we're going to select our lower arm. Where did it go? Sorry, lower leg, lower arm. That's what I want. Cool. Okay, so now we can select this and we can extrude it out. And I'm not going to follow the mannequin 100% here, but it'll be close. Close enough anyways. So now what I can do is I can take this and kind of shift it forward a little bit. And the reason that I would recommend doing this is just because when you go to rig this thing, you want to have a little bit of bending in your mesh. So even if we take this whole thing and we just rotate it forward a little bit and just move it like this, that's fine too. It's up to you. But again, we're going to want to, in this case, actually, one thing that I want to do is if I isolate this mesh using the slash key on the number pad, I can actually dissolve this and then grab this whole face and hit Control F and P to poke the face, and then I can select the middle vert and hit Alt S just to push this out. And we could probably do the same thing here. This does create more faces, but it's not that many more faces, but this will add a little bit nicer rounding to things so that way, you know, we have the intersection that we need without too much extra geometry. Let's do the same thing to both of the faces on the ends of this arm. Let me just hit numpad period in order to zoom in on here. And then we'll select this face and select this face and then Control F-P, poke the face, select this vert, and Alt S to just shift that out a little bit with the fatten tool. And there we go. Now we've got that there. We could also, once we apply the mirror modifier for this, we can also move the pivot to different parts of the body. And I'll show that in a minute, just so that way it, you know, we can rotate around certain parts of the actual mesh. But we're doing well so far. Let's get to working on our hands. Okay, so let's move right along here with the hands. I'm going to be duplicating these 6 vertices around the wrist, and that's just so that we can create a seamless hand with the same amount of geometry. This will probably be more applicable to if we're doing the mid-poly one when we actually want to connect it. And maybe I'll show you like connecting these pieces together because that could actually reduce some of our poly count in the end. But we'll take a look at it. Now there are, and I'm just extruding this here, there are a number of different types of low poly hands that we could create here. And I'm just gonna scale this down and move it up a little bit. Actually, let's scale the whole thing down. Before I make a mess here, let's separate this off. So what I did there, in case you're wondering, is I hit the L key to select everything that's linked on the mesh, and then I hit P to separate it. And now I'm going to hit Alt Q to shift between the active mesh so I can address this lower arm. And we're going to call this hand. Just name that in my outliner real quick. Okay, so there are a number of types of hands that we could create for a low poly model. Let me make sure that this is, there we go, Shift N to recalculate your normals. I could tell just by the shading here that it didn't look correct. So did that. So the number of types of hands, there's a few different types of hands we could create in a low poly scenario. We could create what I call like the mittens hands, where let's put in a cut here and just bevel this out. And then we can take and extrude this. And there we have, you know, it's just the grouping of the fingers is all in this part and then the thumb on this part. It's probably the lowest poly type of hand we can get. And this is good for, you know, secondary characters or non-player characters that don't actually need to have individual fingers to do anything. If you just kind of want to give the impression of a hand being there, and then we can take and shape this to be a little more hand-like and this to be a little more thumb-like and sort of, you know, move parts around. We may connect this end gun here to make it into 2 quads, and we can kind of push this back here and this here. Maybe open it up a little bit, just to give more of an impression of a hand. And there we go. And then you can imagine that if you were texture painting this, you would, you know, put the separation of the fingers there. And, you know, you might move this up just to make this a little more narrow, maybe flatten it out a bit. Same with this edge up here. Just gonna move that down, make it a little more, a little more hand-like. Go. And we could also take and push these vertices back in here and then just merge them with the M key by saying merge by distance. And now we have a very, very low poly hand, if that's sort of what we're going for. We could also add additional geometry here, so we can turn this into a quad like this. Although this probably won't deform the best, so just be aware of that. And then kind of push this out a little bit, make it a little more round, and then kind of scale these back just a little bit. push them back, make it more of a thumb shape. We'll take these 4 corner verts here and kind of scale those in too. Maybe this. That way it becomes more round and thumb-like, and we'll just scale it like that. Push these vertices in a little bit. So there we are starting to get like a very low poly looking hand. And then we also need to close the back of it and maybe push this out a little bit. And then if we want, we can take this now and kind of, whoops, no, there we go. Stop that. I'm trying to rotate it instead of extruding it. There we go. And you can see here how this can sort of become the beginning of our low poly hand there. See? So that's one type of hand we can do. Let's just undo a lot of this, and I'm just going to duplicate this off. And I'm going to delete everything except for the ring here. So let's say only faces. And actually, let's just do it like this. Just delete those vertices underneath. There we go. So we're back with our original 6 vertices, and now we can extrude this like so. And let's close this up and recalculate our normals. And we need to put in a loop cut here with Control R for the thumb. And we can again bevel the thumb out. I'm kind of roughly making sure it's square. And then we can sort of push these back. And let's say we want to do one where we have 1 finger and then the other 3. So we can grab these 2 edges here in edge mode and right click and hit the S key for subdivide right there. And that'll just put a cut in here. And then we can connect this here, these 2 verts with the J key, same here. And then we can extrude this. Whoops, hit the wrong key. There we go, with the E. And we can also shift this over just a little bit to make it more even. And then here we can extrude out. Keep hitting the wrong key. Sorry about that. There we go. And then we'll extrude our thumb out once more. There we go. So the reason I keep hitting the wrong key, by the way, is because I put the microphone like right in front of my face, which is also in front of the keyboard. And so I'm not always able to, like, my brain just doesn't use the keys in the same way when I don't have like a giant microphone in my face. That's why you might notice that when I'm doing this, sometimes I may misclick. I don't usually do that. It's just because my recording setup is different than my usual work setup. So just keep that in mind if you're wondering. Anyhow, now we can take this and we can sort of scale it down a little bit. And obviously this finger doesn't need to be so large. We can also take this edge and maybe this edge and scale them down so the finger becomes a little more square. And same with this, we can probably scale this down. Maybe these vertices here, we can, oops, let me make sure that I have the right selection tool. There we go. Scale this down just a little bit. It should be wider at the connection to the hand than the rest. And you can see now how we've got, scale these a little bit, how we've got this sort of mitten hand thing going on where we've got a finger there. Obviously this needs to be a little bit longer, so something like this perhaps, and we can begin to shape the hand a little more. Maybe rotate that. Let's bring this part in. This part can come in a little bit and maybe rotate like that, maybe like that. And it's just a matter of finessing this. Your pointer finger also comes back a little bit further. And then this, we can rotate it a little bit and bring that like this. And rotate this like that. And this can come back here. So this is, it's just a little bit of understanding like the shape that your hand makes. So if you look down at the top of your hand, you can see that your pointer finger is a little shorter than your middle finger. Your ring finger may be a little bit longer than your pointer finger, and your pinky finger comes back even further. So we could probably even bring this back like this, and then sort of round this off just a little bit, and then bring this in, something like that. And so it's just a matter of proportions at this point, kind of pushing and playing. Let me also select everything and just merge, because I remember we had 2 vertices here. And we can also kind of flatten out the top of this. It doesn't need to be super pushed out like that. There we go. And of course, if you want more detail, you can add more geometry. Like for example, you can put a cut there and there. You can also bevel this out in the case that you want to deform the finger. So let's move that up there. And basically what this will do is it'll allow this area to collapse in as the tip of the finger rolls down. So it really depends on how much detail you need. So I'm keeping this like super low poly and optimized as much as possible. So now we can move these over. Let me duplicate the edge off and we'll do one with all the fingers. So I'll select these two, Control L, just kind of move them this way, put them a little closer. And then obviously with the thumb, for example, I didn't address this at all because I'm kind of going fast, but you can kind of rotate the thumb a little bit to make it more like an actual thumb by comparison to your own hand. If you take a look at your hand, so let's move this. I kind of went quickly through the mitten version of the hand, so we're gonna do that. Let's bring this out. Now this is starting to look a little more like an actual hand. Yeah, you get the idea. There you go. Okay, and then same with this thumb over here. We can add a subdivision in here. Take the tip of this, rotate it just a little bit. Maybe bring this over. That push this here, and then maybe this can come in a little bit. And then obviously if you need more detail, add more resolution. But essentially this is sort of, you know, how you can create very low poly fingers. And it's just a matter of like pushing and pulling the vertices and trying to get them into the shapes that you want them in. And then of course, you know, later we'll shade smooth, and it doesn't always work the best. So for example, here I can dissolve some of this, and then maybe we can take an edge loop and just cut through here and off to this corner. This way we don't get that ugly shading that we just ran into when we go to shade smooth this. It's not as bad. And so it just takes a little bit of creative finessing of your geometric flow. So yeah, same thing with the bottom. We could do same deal. Let me just solve these, and then we're gonna cut here, here, and here, and there we go. And then this will flow up through the finger now as well. So yeah, nice low poly fingers. And then here, I think we need to do something similar. Let me see what this looks like smooth. That's not too bad. You could probably work with that. But if you did want to change the flow, you can work with this. I mean, this is still a quad here, but you can mess with it. So maybe we would come over here like this. And then my instinct is to add a little more geometry and wrap this around to keep it contiguous. But again, this is adding more geometry. So if you don't mind how it was before, just hit enter there. There it is. And then we have an n-gon here. We could solve this by connecting this here if we need to keep it low poly, and it should still shade fine for the most part. Or we could do the same thing that we did up here and wrap it around. I'm actually going to undo this because I don't mind having this quad here like that. But just keep in mind, like that's sort of a couple of different things you can do to address the flow of your topology. And I'm just going to shift this over a little bit. You know, when you're working at such a low poly level, things like this do make a really big difference. You can see some of the shading errors that we're getting because of the way that the geometry is deformed here on this mesh, and it's such a small amount of geometry that it does make a difference. Obviously, with higher poly counts, you're not going to notice as much. But when you go to paint this, if you're using a very simple shading method inside of your game engine or whatever, you can just create the texture, and it really shouldn't create that much of a problem for you. Anyhow, moving on, let's create a full hand with all 4 fingers. So we're gonna do the same thing. We'll extrude this and bring this kind of out like this. We'll add in the thing for the thumb, the extra loop for the thumb, make it square, extrude that out, and then we'll take this and we're gonna put these cuts in here. Now, I realized that I think I made, no, this should still work. Let's see. Actually, let me undo the whole thumb thing real quickly. So I put this cut in here. We can leave the cut in here. I can grab these two faces and these two faces and I can inset them. And the reason I'm doing this is because when I delete these faces here on the end and scale everything on the X to be flush, you can see here we are preserving these 6 vertices on the back here, but in the front we have 10. So now I can actually extrude these parts. Let's grab this whole edge and just kind of move it in. Same here. And we can also take and sort of scale this a little bit so that they're a little more even. Same here. Let's do that. There we go. They're occupying similar amounts of space. I want to send just a little bit more and bring this over just a little bit. Actually, let's just a little bit. There we go. So now these are a little more similar in terms of their shape and size, and I can extrude them independently. So I can take these two, extrude, and then these two and extrude. And then typically the middle finger is going to be longest, then something like this. And then we can take and do this bevel here, make this a little bit wider, and we can extrude the thumb out. And there we have the beginning of an actual 5-fingered hand. And we can take all of these end faces here and switch our transform pivot to individual origins and just kind of scale them down a little bit because your fingers are usually a little bit smaller. And let's not forget to take these and move that over there and merge everything. Now we could also take and we could merge these down as well. And this is going to create triangles here. And that's honestly, it's not that big a deal. Some people don't like triangles, but in all honesty, like your game engine is going to convert everything to triangles either way. Whatever render engine or game engine you're working in typically is going to be converting it, triangulating everything at the time it goes to render it anyhow. So it's not that big a deal. And now it's just a matter of kind of coming in here and shaping out the hand. So I'll make a slightly more detailed hand. Typically with your fingers, you're going to subdivide it in the center. Oops, like this. And then you're going to subdivide it again to get the tip of the finger. But actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all these fingers here, and I'm just going to work on one finger, and then we're going to go from there and duplicate it over to the other spots. That way we don't have to do too much repetitious work. So let's kind of move this into proportion there. And again, look at your own hands, look at hand reference. You know, it's up to you. Also, I'm going to isolate this entire mesh now. So let's select this one from these others so I can look at it, and Shift H, and then I'll also isolate it like this with the number pad / key. And I'm just going to start to shape out some of these fingers according to, you know, what I know fingers to look like. And but I still want to keep it relatively low poly. So do something like that. And I want to get the shape of the hand to be a little more hand-like. So we can move this in, we can move this in. Let's rotate the thumb. Actually, I'll let the thumb kind of come out like that. That's fine. And we can always rig that up and mess with it later. Something like this. That should be fine. And let's see. So this is a little lopsided here, which is going to bother me. So I'm just going to scale that in a little bit to make this a little more square. That should be fine. We'll also deal with that. And I can also take and just rotate this a little bit. I could also like flatten it out in all the planes, but honestly, it's not that big of a deal. I'm being too picky. There. That should be a little bit better. And let's see. Yeah, that should be fine. It'll be fine. Okay, so now we can take it and duplicate this finger over. So here, and then your middle finger is usually going to be a little bit longer than your pointer finger, maybe even a little bit longer than that. So something like this. And then let's take this again and duplicate it over. And this one's a little bit longer than the pointer finger too, but shorter than the middle finger. So something like that. And then we can do the pinky finger, which is going to be shorter, smaller. So something like that should be okay. Yeah. And now it's just a matter of merging everything up. So we're going to take this and we're going to ML, merge last, and then here ML. And then this one, we can do here, Shift R, here to here, Shift R. And then we'll grab this and this, Shift R, and then this and this, Shift R. Go. And then we can take these three, Shift R, and these three, Shift R. And that's just ML is merging your vertices at the last selected point. So that would be this white one here. And then I can, there we go. There. Now we have our little low poly hand. And we could also, if we want to get really specific, we can kind of shape these to the curvature of the hand a little bit better. You bring this in a little bit more, same with this, because your hand does kind of round out. It's not perfectly straight. It's sort of got this sort of shape going on to it. And again, that's just, you know, reference, experience, looking at it, you know, look at your own hands. Or somebody else's hands. If you got somebody else to use as reference, that's fine too. And then we lost this face in here. I'm not sure what happened to that. Maybe I hid that on accident, but we'll close that up. And there we go. We've got a 5-fingered hand. And if I shade smooth, it doesn't look too bad. It's not great, obviously, because it's low poly, but it should be fine, depending on what style you're going for. So let's hit Alt-H to unhide everything, and then we'll hit the / key on my number pad to unhide everything. So I'm going to go with the 4-fingered hand, just because I like it. So we're going to take this, and here, what I'll do is, instead of deleting those, I'll just separate them off and hide them. And so we can also call this like extra hands. There we go. And let's save that. And then we'll take this one in edit mode and rotate it and scale it a little bit. So it's a little more, whoops, a little more in proportion. I keep meaning to rotate and I keep hitting the E key instead of the R key and it just extrudes it. All right, there we go. It's a little more in proportion, maybe a little large. That's okay. We can actually smooth it down in a minute. So I'm going to close up the back here by grabbing this edge, and then we can also just kind of shift this. One interesting way that I do this is I'll go to active element and switch my transform orientation to normal. And then if you grab the move gizmo, you can actually move this according to the normal of those faces. So that it moves like that, and then just switch these back to global and median, whatever you're working with. And that sort of fixes that issue there. So now we have a hand that we can work with. And then I'll just take this and I'll right click with all the vertices selected, and I'll just say smooth vertices once. And then I'll just kind of like smooth the hand down a little bit. You don't want to do that too much though, because it could cause problems. And I think I do want to shift some of these vertices up, just kind of slide them, and then maybe use Alt S to kind of push them in a little bit. Yeah. See here, just to sort of give a normal curvature to the hand. We can also take like these verts here. Whoops, let me switch my tool back to the selection gizmo, and we'll grab these here, and that's all the fingers. Deselect that one, and we can kind of push that up a little bit because you have like a normal bend to the hand like that. And also, generally speaking, if you were gonna rig this to a point where these fingers would bend, you would probably want to add more geometry, but that's getting a little bit closer to our sort of mid-poly level and not quite in keeping with the low poly. I'm gonna move this pinky back a little more, maybe fatten it just a little bit. There we go. And that's just, you know, for example, if you wanted to get more mid-poly, then we would take these parts here and we would bevel them, something like this or this. That way, when you bend these parts, you know, the fingers will collapse properly and not just create like an ugly mess of deformation. So it's just something to be aware of, although I'm not going to worry about it too much because we're keeping this low poly, and we'll get to, when we get to the rigging part, we'll see if we need to make any changes. I'm also going to double tap G to slide this up and hit the C key and move that back, just to give a little more of a sort of connection shape with the wrist here. And then we're going to select this whole hand and just kind of like overlap them like this. This way they look a little more connected. And then if we smooth out all these models, you can see we've got this body taking shape here. Okay. Or if you want to leave it low poly and faceted like this, that's fine as well. It's totally up to you how you want to do this. I can also move this back just a little bit. Yeah. Oops. Something like that. There we go. Just being nitpicky. Okay. So the last thing that we have to do is the head. So there's a couple ways I like to address this. Now, if you want it connected, we're going to have to bevel this out or do something similar. I'm actually just going to take this face and duplicate it. This. And we're going to separate it out. And we're going to call this head. I'm hitting F2 to rename stuff, by the way, in case you didn't know. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to center this. And because we've done it this way, we can do it like that. Let's flatten this here. Move this into place. Extrude this up. Take the bottom verts and kind of rotate them. There we go. And I'm not gonna go completely according to the mannequin here. Let's actually apply this mirror modifier and isolate that really quickly. And then let's poke this bottom face here like we did before. This way we can move this out. And that should be fine. Okay, so unhiding everything, let's look at it from the front. It needs to be a little bit wider if we want to follow. There we go, that should be okay. And then we can turn on our mirror geometry editing and just kind of slide this in here and slide this forward a little bit just to make it a little more round, and maybe even move this back a little bit, this, and then move some of these vertices down so it's overlapping more. There we go, something like that, creating the neck. And then we can work on the head. So we're going to extrude this up. And we'll put a loop cut in here and take these three verts here and just kind of move them back. We can start to round the back of the head out like this, and then this can be the top of the head. And you can see here we're starting to create a head shape. And then we want to take and extrude this out the front, just like this. And then I'm going to move these verts down along with these to sort of form the front of the face. And then these two at the top here can form the forehead. And you can see here we've already started. I can take these two verts here and just kind of scale them out. This one can come up just a little bit. And you can see here how we're starting to create this face shape. And then these two can come down. And then these two can go up. And again, make sure you've got that mirror editing mesh symmetry going on. So that way when you select on one side, as long as you have the same vertices on the other side, it will act accordingly. So here, something like that. And maybe we even want to these just a little bit, because the shape of the human head is it tends to be a little bit wider in the back and a little more narrow up front. So if we bring this open, and then we can take these edges here, yep, and kind of scale them in. And maybe slide this back a little bit. Go. And maybe take these pieces on the side and even rotate them a little bit. Bring this out. Go. Actually, I wanna leave that a little more narrow back there. And there we go. We have a very low poly head that we can start with. And then again, if you want to get more detailed, or if you want to add face geometry or soften this out a little bit even, you could add in extra geometry here. And then we will need to make sure that we mirror this like so. Go. We can bring this down, kind of round that out. And then that gives us more geometry to play with. We could even add in some maybe like face detail here. So, you know, maybe like something that would give you the low poly indication of some sort of eye socket there or something like that. But that's essentially how you would begin to create a low poly face. And then in the next video, we will get to making a mid poly, and then we'll talk about rigging and UV unwrapping and texturing. But essentially, this is the process that I would go about. In fact, we can take this whole thing and let's apply this mirror modifier, take this and just smooth it a little bit. I'll just use the regular smooth. I do have some add-ons that give me additional smooths. Like for example, if I undo that and say mesh smoothing, inflate smoothing, it kind of preserves the volume of the overall head just a little bit better than the regular smoothing, which kind of like you can see we've lost a little detail in the chin and the back of the head and some of the neck. So some of these can be worth looking into, and that's from the volume preserving smoothing add-on. So I do prefer that a lot of the times when I'm working and smoothing stuff out, but I understand that not everybody has access to those extra paid add-ons and things like that. So yeah, just keep that in mind that there are some other very useful and oftentimes affordable tools out there that do help make the job look a little bit, work a little easier and make your mesh look a little nicer. So there you go. All right, so there we go. We have our low poly character resembling a human being. And in the next video, we can talk about connecting these parts up, maybe doing some UV unwrapping and getting some simple texturing in on the low poly one. And then in a further video, we'll look at doing like a mid poly, maybe stitching some of these parts together. There's just so many different ways to do stuff in 3D that I try to think about, like, what should I be showing the audience in terms of how to do this? So this is more intermediate level where I'm not really calling out every single key that I'm pressing, but just showing like how I go about the process, maybe what's in my head as I'm doing this sort of thing. That way, people who already know the basics can follow along with some more intermediate level stuff. Anyhow, thank you for watching the video. I hope you got some value out of it. If you did, please help me out by hitting the like and subscribe button and sharing it with anyone who might also additionally find it helpful. I'm happy to provide the information, and if there's any comments or questions, leave them in the comments section. I'll address them as soon as I can. And otherwise, thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.